So once you get driving in the Sport Turismo, first impressions are hugely positive. Like other Porsches I've driven, it feels like a big solid piece of kit, incredibly well screwed together, and I've got no creaks or rattles here on the interior. Now, something I mentioned earlier about the driving position is that I actually haven't had the seat in its lowest position like I have in other Porsches, because this is a big car, and as a result it can be a little bit difficult to judge where the curb is, so I've actually had to lift my seat. And as a result, I've got a wonderful view of the road ahead. The A-pillars are quite thick, but I've been quite fortunate to not need to look around them at any junctions. The wing mirrors are of a decent size, and I have got blind spot monitoring them as well. And if I look over my shoulder, I do find that the D-pillar is a little bit thick, but it doesn't create too much of a blind spot, which is very, very handy. Also, rear visibility is not too bad because we have got a substantial sized screen, and also the only thing I'd mention is there is a little bit of an obstruction from the rear seats, so that's just something to be aware of, because as I mentioned, they are the kind of one-piece sport seats. So yeah, when it comes to first impressions, I mean, it's a big car, it feels very solid, it drives very well and quickly, and of course, being a hybrid, yes, it is a bit heavy, but it's been pretty frugal as well. Yeah, so first impressions, really good. Now, when it comes to trim levels in the Sport Turismo range, there are 6 to choose from, and they are a mixture of hybrids and non-hybrids. Now, it starts off with the 4, and that is an E-hybrid. You then go on to the Platinum Edition, which is what I've got here, and that's also an E-hybrid. You then go up to the 4S, which again is also an E-hybrid. We then jump to the GTS, which is a non-hybrid version, and then we have the Turbo S, again non-hybrid, but we finish on a high with the Turbo S E-hybrid. So there are 6 trim levels to choose from in the range, and as I said, with the hybrids and the non-hybrids, you get various degrees of performance, and also there is a change in engines. Lower down, you've got the 2.9 litre V6, and then higher up, you have got the 4 litre V8, and that's when you got a massive increase in power. And I can't really give a recommendation because it depends on what you want from your Sport Turismo, but I will be honest, the amount of standard kit I've got on this Platinum Edition, I think is absolutely amazing. I've got things like the sunroof, a Bose sound system, a massive satellite navigation with Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. I've got adaptive suspension when I put it into Sport and Sport Plus mode. I mean, these are all things that you would tend to pay extra for on a normal Porsche. So I would say if you're not too concerned about the engine up front, go for the Platinum Edition. But if you want to have just hellfire, then of course the Turbo S with the hybrid system is going to be the way to go. However, if you go for the non-hybrid version of the Turbo S, then you're going to get a slightly lighter car, and as a result you're going to get a more purist feel if you want that from your sporty estate car. But yeah, if you're not too concerned about the engine up front, go Platinum Edition. If however you want to get everything and just go nuts, go for a V8 and then whack a few options on top of your car. Definitely make it your own. Now, as I just mentioned, there are 2 engines to choose from in the Sport Turismo range. There's a 2.9 litre V6, which is what I've got in this Platinum Edition, and a fire-breathing 4 litre V8 if you want all that power. And I'm going to be honest, with the V6, with the hybrid battery and motor, I think this is actually a bit of a sweet spot, especially with the Platinum Edition. So up front with the V6, I've got around 330 brake horsepower. The 17.9 kilowatt hour battery and electric motor, they also produce around 130 brake horsepower. And then when combined, the total's around 455 brake horsepower. So this is no slouch. I mean, the car weighs over 2 tons. I think it's actually over 2.25 tons. but yet 0 to 62 time takes 4.4 seconds. So this is pretty bloomin' brisk. And that's aided by the fact that this has all-wheel drive, and we've got a glorious 8-speed PDK transmission. So it means when it comes to being a performance estate car, yeah, it has got the numbers to back it up. Now, granted, against some of its rivals, of course, the Audi RS6, it can't compete, especially with the engine up front. But I don't see this Platinum Edition V6 as one of those types of cars. I see this as more of a Grand Tourer. Take the family with you, take your luggage, have the dog in the boot. You know, you can just cross continents with ease. And then you've got the frugality of driving around town in electric mode, or just having the hybrid system working. And then, yes, with a flick of a switch, you can get it into Sport Plus, do a launch control launch, and just, you know, scare the crap out of the family who are in the car. It just seems to be a jack of all trades. Now, of course, with that engine and with the hybrid system, let's talk about kind of economy, because, yeah, that's an important thing to talk about. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you start driving the Sport Turismo, it will go straight into electric mode. And with a full battery, I have got around 34 miles of range. But when I've charged this up, it's given me around 28 or 29. And you know what? I'm actually really impressed by that. So it does mean you can drive to work and back on one charge, because in the UK, the average commute is still around 24 to 25 miles. So it does mean then you can drive without using the engine, come home and then just plug it in and carry on. Now, when it comes to charging, it's only a 7 kilowatt charger, and it will take around 2.5 hours to get it fully charged, because, well, it's not a proper EV. So again, that's just really handy. And if you want to charge it overnight using a 3-pin socket, then of course you can do. Now, when it comes to the official economy figures in this particular Sport Turismo, yeah, it's a little bit far-fetched. I mean, this is a trait that happens with pretty much all plug-in hybrids I've driven, because it tells you something silly like 200 or 300 miles per gallon. And with the Sport Turismo, it is the same. Porsche claim I should be able to get between 104 and 134 mpg, and I can tell you now, I can't get anywhere near that. So, realistically, if you are driving purely on the engine by itself, perhaps you're charging up the battery, you'll get realistically around 30 mpg, which I'll be honest, for the size of the car, the weight of the car, I'm impressed with. And then in combination with the hybrid system, when I did do a bit of a trek to see a friend of mine, I was getting around 46 mpg, which again, I'm pretty impressed with for the size of car. Now, I know if I was doing lots of town driving, that would increase, because it would chop from hybrid to EV to engine, you know, automatically. But I am impressed with those figures. And also with a full tank and a full charge, with the tank, it was telling me I had around 480 miles range, and again with that battery, around 28, 29. So when it comes to the economy figures, realistically, I am pretty impressed by them. And there is that extra bonus where you can drive to work and back purely on the battery and not use any fuel at all. So you get the best of both worlds. Now, I have talked about the boring stuff regarding the engine, all the facts and figures, but the other side of a V6 or a V8 is, how does it feel? How does it drive? Well, again, going with that kind of GT feel to the Sport Turismo with this V6, it's very refined. It's actually a bit muted. I mean, if I was to put my foot down or put it into Sport Plus mode and then put my foot down, I mean, you can hear the engine, but it's a little bit muted. It's a little bit stunted. And that's no fault of the engine. That's actually down to kind of the whole EU regulations and petrol particulate filters and everything. So I wasn't expecting this to be a really raspy V6. But again, it just adds to that nice GT feel to the Sport Turismo. And that nice kind of, as I said, crossing continents without any effort whatsoever. But also, I do love the response from the engine, and that's down to the gearbox and also the feel it gives you, because you've got 700 Newton meters of torque. Now, when you are in hybrid mode, I will mention that even though we got an 8-speed PDK, which is a glorious gearbox, I absolutely love it. And I have gotten quite used to the PDK with other Porsches I have driven and reviewed. But those were just mated to internal combustion engines. And this is actually a great example now. So I'm in hybrid mode. I've got it in, here we go. Oh, yeah. There's a little bit of hesitation in the gearbox. It didn't know if it wanted to use the battery, the engine, or both. And as I accelerated, I could feel the battery, I think, was doing everything. Then the engine took over, and then it changed gear. So when you're in hybrid mode, it just wants to drive in a relaxed fashion, but it's still a very, very good gearbox. Of course, you've got the flappy paddles, which are just wonderful to use when on the move, especially when you put it into manual mode, because it's just so quick and snappy. And then if you go into Sport or Sport Plus, again, the changes are quick and quite brutal as well, especially if you do a full launch control launch. But yeah, with the engine, the V6, it's a little bit muted, but it does make a nice noise when you put your foot down. But again, it just adds to the character of the car. You've got that V6 there, but it's more for just the kind of effortlessness of your journey. Now, of course, in a big performance car like this, get going is one thing, but stopping is another. And the brakes in this Sport Turismo, no complaints whatsoever. They got a really lovely feel to them. They're not too grabby. And yes, this is a big heavy car, so you can feel the weight if you have to do an emergency stop, but you just got the confidence knowing you're gonna stop in the Sport Turismo. So yeah, brake feel, the brake power, absolutely spot on. Now, of course, this being a hybrid, we have got all the little gimmicks that you would expect from a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So as I mentioned, you have the ability to drive in pure electric. You can go into hybrid mode. And unlike, as I mentioned earlier, other cars where you kind of have a power gauge on your rev counter, no, we got a traditional rev counter here, and we got these little LED lights that come on to let you know if you're charging the battery or if you're using the battery. And purely by looking down, you know exactly what's going on, because you can see the revs might be at 1200 RPM. You can see that there's a couple of lights in the e-power section. So that lets you know that the hybrid system is in full swing. Then now you can see it's got 0 RPM, the engine is off, but I'm using one light of e-power, which has now gone to charge because I'm slowing down and just letting the car do its thing. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to charging, with a 7 kilowatt charger, you are looking at around 2.5 hours. And with a 3-pin socket, I just recommend leaving it overnight. But also, when you're driving along in hybrid mode, you've got additional modes as well. You can have it as an e-hold, so it will hold the charge of the battery. So you're just kind of putting charges in, or it won't actually go any lower than where it currently is. Or you can actually do a full e-charge. So basically the engine and the brakes are charging the battery. Definitely helpful when you run out of charge. So that's actually really good. But I did mention as well, when it comes to economy, yes, it will drop it down to around 30 mpg when you're just using that V6 engine, which again, I was very impressed by. So yeah, when it comes to the hybrid side of the Sport Turismo e-hybrid, it does everything that I want it to do. It does everything that a plug-in hybrid should do. Again, adding to that jack of all trades feeling to it. I don't know if you can tell already, but I'm very much warming up to this Sport Turismo e-hybrid. Now, when it comes to ride and refinement in the Sport Turismo, I've been hugely impressed. Now, with the ride, it feels very much like a typical Porsche. Now, when I had the Taycan EV a couple of years ago, I was gobsmacked, flabbergasted, outstanded by how well that car rode with the weight and the 21-inch alloy wheels I had on that car. Now granted, it wasn't a magic carpet, but it just dealt with the bumps and imperfections so well. And the same has to be said with the Sport Turismo. I've got as standard 21-inch alloy wheels, and this thing, well, it doesn't necessarily glide over the bumps and imperfections, but I hear them. But for the most part, I do not feel them. Now, yes, you go over a large pothole or manhole cover, you are going to feel a bit of a boom and vibration come into the cabin. But again, it's not as shocking as I was expecting it to be. I was expecting quite an abrupt feel. So to have it just kind of, just in its stride, deal with those bumps and imperfections, again, adds to this ability of it being a brilliant long-range cruiser. I'm doing a long trip now, and this thing is not skipping a beat. And of course, with this having the variable suspension, I put it into Sports, put it into Sport Plus, yes, the car does sink down. But again, it's not too uncomfortable. I'll be honest, Sport Plus you're really only going to use to show off the launch control. Sport is pretty good when you're kind of chucking it about in the corners, but you're going to drive this mainly in normal e-hybrid mode, and it just goes. It just deals with the bumps and imperfections so well. I've had passengers sat in the back whilst I've been driving about, and they've loved the ride quality again in the back of the Sport Turismo. This again just, it's just another thread to its bow. It's another strength that this car has. Now, refinement is an area of not weakness per se, but something I will mention. Now, when you are driving along, I'm doing about 70 miles an hour now, and the main intrusion is tyre roar. That's it. I've got the tiniest bit of wind noise coming from the wind mirror, but it's not really something I hear. And the engine, when it's going, there is a tiny little drone, but that's about it. It's really just tyre noise is the main intrusion into the cabin. And, well, I'm not too bothered by it because I've got a Bose sound system in here as standard. So I just put on my tunes and just sit back and relax. Yeah, this thing is just, it's a continent killer. I love it. Absolutely love it. Ride's lovely. Refinement is still very good. Perfect. So I've just talked about the ride and refinement. Now, how about the handling? Well, again, it feels like a Porsche in the corners, except for the fact that it's a big car and it's a heavy car. So firstly, the steering wheel just feels wonderful in my hands. I love the quality of the leather. Perfect thickness, perfect size. Absolutely brilliant for everyday driving. Chucking it into the corners when you're in hybrid mode. Yes, because the ride height is at its highest, it's not necessarily lean and roll, but you can kind of feel the car wanting to push out a little bit, but you have got that all-wheel drive system just keeping it in check. Now, with this particular car, I have got as an optional extra the rear wheel steering, which means at low speed this thing is very agile and doesn't feel like a car that's over 5 meters long. And then when you put it into Sport and you put it into Sport Plus, yes, there's more weight in the steering, and you can just feel everything the Sport Turismo's doing in the corners, and it's a lot of fun, but the weight does take a bit of the fun away from you. You can just feel the weight of the Sport Turismo in the corners, and again, I go back to it with the fact of this doesn't feel like a proper sporty estate car. This feels like a brilliant GT car or GT family estate car, which just has a huge amount of performance and handles brilliantly at the same time, but it doesn't want to be chucked about in the corners. It would rather just kind of sedately on a B road get chucked about, not necessarily thrown about on the Nürburgring. So yeah, in terms of the ride, refinement and the handling, perfect. I absolutely love it. It's not the most fun car out there, but by damn it is very, very good. So with my time in the Sport Turismo, what have been some of the highlights and some of the little niggles that I've come across living with it? Well, highlights have basically been the car itself. It's comfortable, practical, spacious, very well equipped. It has the performance, it has the ride, the handling, everything. I've just absolutely fallen for it. Now, in regards to niggles and cons, so firstly, some of the ergonomics I think need to be kind of reassessed, especially when it comes down to optional extras, because the buttons up here for the 360 camera and the parking sensors does feel a bit like an afterthought. They couldn't put it on here or on the actual infotainment screen, so they kind of chucked a couple of physical buttons up there. And then I'd probably say the rear seats. I would like Porsche to just kind of acknowledge that this is not a 5-seater car, this is a 4-seater, and then just do away with that middle seat belt, and then just perhaps make it a little bit more spacious, or put something there for your rear passengers to enjoy, so they don't feel as though there could be at some point somebody sat in the middle, because they are definitely not going to enjoy it. And then in regards to other pros, I mean, the safety systems have not felt too intrusive. Granted, the lane keep assist, when it's been activated, on a couple of occasions it's kind of pulled me into lane, but it's not been kind of a constant thing when it just, you know, annoys you and you have to switch it off. I do love, however, that if you do stray out of the lane, it does sound like a bit of a dubstep noise, which is quite cool. But, you know, it's just one of those quirky Porsche things. And actually, one final thing I am going to mention, I don't know if this is going to be a con whatsoever, but I'm wondering how much washer fluid you can use in a Panamera, because when you use the front screen washer jets, there are 9 jets. That's 9 streams of water spraying onto the windscreen. I mean, I've used it a few times. I've had all sorts of weather conditions whilst I've had the Panamera. But oh my God, when I drove past the countryside and it got completely obliterated with dead bugs, oh wow, the amount of water that was just coming through. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this thing drops 100 kilos in weight simply by me emptying the washer bottle. But no, in terms of niggles and that, they are very, very few and far between. And I think it's now time we move on to the conclusion. So what are my thoughts on the Porsche Panamera 4 e-hybrid Sport Turismo Platinum Edition? 3 words, and I think you know what words I'm going to use. I love it. I think this is probably my favourite Porsche. I have just taken to a car so quickly with this car. I've just fallen for it head over heels. The exterior looks are just beautiful. It's elegant, but it has that kind of dynamic Porsche look to it. It is practical. The boot is a decent size. You can get your luggage in there. You can get a pet in there if you really want to. You can get 2 adult passengers in the back, and there's no restrictions. They are comfortable. 6-footers can sit back there. With this Platinum Edition, the standard spec is just, I'm gobsmacked. I was not expecting to pick up a car which has a Bose sound system, a sunroof, and just all the gubbins that you would expect as optional extras on a Porsche as standard. Yeah, this is, for me, one of the best Porsches I've ever driven. And because I've taken my mindset to this car, in the fact of this is not a fire-breathing, super sporty estate car. Yes, you can go for one with the V8 version, but somehow I feel that the Audi RS6 kind of has that mantle, has that title there, and no one's really going to strip it of that title. I can't see the Sport Turismo doing that. I just see this as a big family wagon where you've just got the performance, the frugality, all the hybrid features that you would expect nowadays in just such a brilliant package. If I had a 5-car garage, I'd have one of these in there. I have got to have in my 5-car garage a Sport Turismo. That's a mad thing to say, I know. I think I would have this even over a Taycan, or for my 5-car garage I'd have this and I'd have a Taycan, probably a Cross Turismo. But yeah, I absolutely love this car, and if you want just a very good wagon, I advise you to go out there and take a drive in this, because this feels truly special in a very unique way. I know that sounds daft, but yeah, I love it. I really do love it, and I don't want to give this back to Porsche. I really don't. I even like the brown leather. I think the guys from Porsche knew it was my birthday today, and I'm 41 years old, or 41 years young I'm going to say, but I think they knew to get me a car that was spec'd in such a way that had this really nice kind of conservative feel about it. It's not too showy. Yeah, love it. So everyone, I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Porsche Panamera Sport Turismo. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you the full title. As always, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and hit that bell notifications icon to let you know when I, Dave the Auto Bear, bring out a new video. And of course, if you've got any questions about the Panamera and my time with it, please put them down in the comments section below. Of course, I'm on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, so don't forget to follow on there for additional content of cars I come across or events I go to. But everyone, I hope you have yourselves a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all in the next video, because, well, yeah, I'm going to bring out another one as well. But I'm just, I absolutely love this car, and I just don't want to give it back.